You trusted the market. You believed in justice.
Nikola shares are tumbling after a short seller called the company, quote, an intricate fraud built on dozens of lies.
Then, the unthinkable. A giant fell. Billions vanished. Trevor Milton, a name whispered, then shouted across Wall Street.
In a lifetime of listening to stories about innocent people wrongly prosecuted, I have never heard anything like what happened to Trevor Milton.
He cried foul, a quote, hit piece. He called it a deep state conspiracy orchestrated by, quote, evil forces.
So a short seller is a person or a fund that actively bets against you that your stock is going to collapse. So unlike a regular investor that buys shares and they hope that the stock goes up, short sellers buy shares and they force it down. So it's like it should be completely illegal.
What was your reason for pardoning Trevor Milton?
But what if the very architects of the accusation were the true manipulators? What if that, quote, hit piece was a spotlight?
In a world drowning in distorted narratives, one unlikely voice rises. A man who exposed the real corruption. He understands their playbook, the lies, the leverage, the ruthless quest for power.
This guy, he's a Greek Orthodox priest, able to work and be a man of the cloth.
This is actually kind of like the opposite of Wolf of Wall Street, where he was, Belfort was trying to like promote the stocks and then sell out before everyone else did. This is, the inverse of that, where you're taking a short position you're betting against and then trying to push the stock down.
Silenced for good. Kill the messenger. They will fight. They will deceive. Because when the truth is an inversion, nothing is as it seems. This is part 1. If you've ever watched this channel and enjoyed the content, could I ask for a small favor? Please hit the subscribe button, share the content, and add your thoughts in the comments below. It's the only way we can keep growing, despite the algorithm. Your subscription, shares, and comments help this channel more than I can explain right now, make you an integral part of our success. I promise to return the favor by making the show increasingly better. We're on this journey together, and I'm willing to make that promise. Do we have a deal?
This Trevor Milton interview, it consumes you. What hidden currents do you see beneath its surface?
What hidden currents do I see beneath the surface? Well, Theodora, it's a familiar performance, a man claiming grave injustice, a narrative crafted with such conviction it threatens to eclipse reality. Milton speaks of a profound, quote, miscarriage of justice that altered his preconceptions about our country. He paints himself as the prey of a coordinated attack orchestrated by, of course, short sellers. And as we will explore, he and I, despite superficially similar experiences, stand as fundamental opposites.
You often hear the phrase miscarriage of justice, and we had this pretty amazing dinner last night where you explained exactly what happened to you. And the details are so shocking that I just want to start this by saying I'm really excited for people to hear exactly what happened.
He champions a colossal loss. Nikola's valuation, he claims, was annihilated. Is that the full extent of the truth?
He asserts a staggering $34 billion vanished. He blames a, quote, hit piece from Hindenburg Research led by Nate Anderson, alleging this was all designed to, quote, force failure for profit, of course. He estimates Anderson alone sees somewhere between $30 and $100 million. His central accusation? Hindenburg conspired directly with the Department of Justice, ensuring an indictment, ensuring the stock's collapse, ensuring their illicit profit. Milton chose to take Nikola public via SPAC.
A special purpose acquisition company, or SPAC, is a shell company formed to raise capital through an initial public offering, or IPO, in order to acquire an existing company. At the time of their IPOs, special purchase acquisition companies have no existing business operations or even stated targets for acquisition. In fact, in general, a SPAC's only assets are monies raised through the IPO. SPACs are also known as blank check companies because IPO investors have no idea what company they'll ultimately be investing in.
It's crucial to understand that SPACs, especially during that period, became notorious for inflated valuations and a higher propensity for fraud, often leaving retail investors holding the bag when the true value inevitably collapsed. Milton himself acknowledges that, quote, Most SPACs were, well, get this, fraud.
It successfully went public on June 4th, 2020. 1 week later, its valuation peaked at $34 billion. It reached this thanks to a hydrogen truck that was never made. On top of that, in that quarter, Nikola's revenue was $36,000 for installing solar panels on Trevor's house. To put this in perspective, Nikola was at this time more valuable than Ford, which had $28 billion valuation, the revenue of $155 billion, and sold 5 million vehicles.
We grew it to the point where we were bursting at our seams inside of in our basement, and our whole goal was to build a clean emission truck, and it kind of morphed through the time. Like we started off as like a natural gas truck, and then we moved it to a hydrogen zero emission truck.
So we're going to try to keep people from driving off, but this thing fully functions and works, which is really incredible. And this truck will come to market. I can promise you that. For every doubter out there that said that there's no way this is true, how can that be possible? We've done it.
Yet he dismissed this short-selling report as, quote, salacious and false, a mere hit piece to terrorize the market. Did he or Carlson effectively address the points made in that report?
Salacious and false? Which parts? No, that is the critical mission. Neither Milton nor Carlson ever genuinely confronted the specific allegations within Hindenburg's report. They call it a hit piece, but they don't engage with the details of the alleged fraud, such as the claim that the Nikola 1 truck, shown in a promotional video, was simply rolled down a hill without its own propulsion. Milton himself admits the truck was not fully functional and would have taken, quote, a month's worth of work, maybe 2 months, to drive itself. The evidence exists. Listeners can find the full Hindenburg report online. The conclusions then become, in my opinion, self-evident.
What's crazy is when, later on we ended up doing a commercial and we're like, oh yeah, go ahead and use it for commercial, no problem. You see like the Chevy Camaro turning into Bumblebee on the Transformers. It's like, you don't think that GM's defrauding everyone because the Camaro becomes Bumblebee. You're like, it's a commercial or it's a movie. Who cares? This is what it's used for. I was like, yeah, go ahead and use it. Who cares? So they used our truck in a commercial and they rolled it down a hill. All the parts worked on it, could have powered itself if we wanted to. We probably would have taken a month's worth of work to make sure it was safe enough to, maybe 2 months to make sure it was safe enough to drive all on its own. But the truck functioned. It was real.
The truck in the video had no engine, was towed to the top of the hill, and then rolled down to make it seem like it was fully working. One Nikola engineer later revealed that it even had duct tape doors so it wouldn't fall off, and the Nikola 1 project was abandoned immediately after.
And this was the lie that destroyed my life. This was the moment that destroyed my life. Because later on, the short sellers sold it to the government that this truck was fake and it never worked. And that message was so sexy that this truck was rolling down the hill that no one cared about the facts. They cared about this headline: Nikola rolls a truck down a hill. And that's what ended up allowing these people, all these evil people, to destroy the company, destroy me, make hundreds of millions of dollars in profit, and the government to indict me. Was this big fat lie by the short sellers that the truck didn't function.
So this interview then is less about a search for truth and more about the careful construction of a favorable narrative.
Precisely. He speaks of staggering personal losses, apparently over $80 million in legal fees for his attorneys alone, and over $100 million paid by his company to Kirkland. He even claims Kirkland and Ellis, his initial attorneys, provided the Department of Justice with a, quote, 9 steps on how to frame me, end quote, blueprint. This paints a picture of corruption at every level. This is a compelling narrative. The lone individual against the machine, caught in a conspiratorial web of short sellers and corrupt government agents. But what Milton omits, and what his narrative intentionally obscures, in my opinion, is the other side of this coin. The times when short sellers act not as orchestrators of destruction, but as inconvenient truth tellers, exposing corruption that institutions, including the government and media, often protect. Tucker Carlson's portrayal of short sellers as, quote, criminals and, quote, evil fundamentally misses a critical part of financial history. Short sellers have, in many instances, if not most, been instrumental in bringing down some of the biggest frauds in history, serving as a sort of essential check against corporate malfeasance. Think of Enron, meticulously dismantled by Jim Chanos, or the massive fraud at Wirecard, uncovered by Fraser Paring. These weren't acts of villainy, but deeply researched efforts to reveal lies and protect investors.
It should be completely illegal. It should be.
Well, it has been for most of the last 100 years, from I think the Depression until right before the last financial crisis. It's so clearly immoral and bad for a country and for markets that I don't exactly know why we have it, but we've had it since 2007. It's fucking crazy, man.
And here's a key hypocrisy. Tucker Carlson, claiming to be an investigative journalist, profits from advertising and viewership when he publishes his own reports. Like this interview with Milton, for example. He asserts he should be protected by the First Amendment, and he should be. Yet he simultaneously suggests that investigative short reports should be illegal because short sellers make money when they release them. The crucial distinction is this. Short sellers, when they short a stock, take on unlimited liability and must be right for their analysis to pay off. A journalist, however, faces no such direct financial risk for an opinion piece or a biased report. The very standard he applies to others, he conveniently exempts himself from. Adding to this, Milton's understanding of short selling itself is fundamentally flawed.
So a short seller is a person or a fund that actively bets against you that your stock is going to collapse. So unlike a regular investor that buys shares and they hope that the stock goes up, short sellers buy shares and they force it down. So it's like it should be completely illegal.
He states that, quote, unlike a regular investor that buys shares and they hope that the stock goes up, short sellers buy shares and they force it down. This is incorrect, of course. Short sellers do not buy stock. They borrow them to sell, hoping to buy them back later at a lower price to return to the lender. This basic misunderstanding of the very topic he is condemning further indicates his lack of sophistication on the subject. And it's worth noting that Martin Shkreli, another figure in this saga, also appeared on Tucker Carlson.
What do you think the public missed about your story?
I think virtually everything.
Shkreli, the former business partner of Ligand CEO John Higgins, also used the Tucker Carlson platform, much like Milton, to rewrite his narrative, conveniently omitting the key charges and claims for which he was found guilty. This suggests a pattern of selective truth where the platform serves as a stage for perceived rehabilitation rather than full accountability or journalistic integrity.
You speak of fighting the system. You too face the full force of the government. Was your experience truly so different from Milton's?
Yeah, our experience was different. We both faced the government, but under very different circumstances. Mine was not merely a defense. It was an awakening. The SEC brought charges against me alleging a, quote, manipulative short scheme, end quote. Yet the jury's very first finding was that I did not engage in a manipulative short scheme. Despite this unequivocal verdict, the SEC unleashed 4 false press releases. One, proclaiming victory, was a direct contradiction of the jury's finding. And when urged by my counsel to retract it, they chose instead to disseminate it widely, emailing it to their entire email subscriber list.
A false victory, a deliberate distortion. What was their true motive?
What's the SEC's true motive? During their investigation, the SEC squandered vast sums of taxpayer dollars questioning, get this, my Orthodox Christian religious identity and affiliation, and making religiously bigoted comments. This was not about financial misconduct. It was a calculated attempt to dismantle my character, to discredit me through prejudice. The timing was no coincidence either. On September 12, 2018, they filed charges against me. Just 2 months prior to that, on July 13, 2018, I had publicly released my second letter to Congress exposing the SEC itself, detailing its, quote, culture of investigational incompetence and financial illiteracy. This was not a genuine investigation. It was Retaliation. And then, Theodora, during the most intense early period of the SEC investigation, something truly tragic happened. My lawyer and close friend, Doug McLean, who was with me through the unprecedented 47 hours of testimony where these sociopathic investigators lost their composure, mocked Christ, and where, amid testimony, I happened to glance over and noticed his hands shaking uncontrollably. Well, when we returned from Washington, D.C. to Boston, he took his own life, leaving a wife and 4 beautiful young children behind. It was a devastating loss, and it underscored the immense and unfair pressure these institutions, these corrupt institutions, can exert, not just on the targets, but on those who stand by them. I learned later he was under unfair scrutiny himself, related to another large fund in Boston. You see, the SEC contributed to the immense pressure Doug felt, while Milton, in his interview, refers to purported near tragedies as a result of his experience. I lived through actual real loss and actual real tragedy.
And your earlier encounter with Donald Trump, you believe that played a part?
Well, it's impossible to ignore. In October 2015, during his first campaign, before he had won any primaries, Trump visited Keene, New Hampshire, where my parish is located, or was located at the time. He sought out and asked for my blessing. It was the first time he had ever sought a blessing from a priest. The encounter, occurring as it did before his political ascent, set the action against me in motion at the SEC. It was a further public acknowledgement of my standing, which made me undeniably a target.
You've always maintained that the pharmaceutical industry and regulators are too intertwined. How did that play out in your case?
How did that play out in my case? My fight was specifically against fraud at Ligand Pharmaceuticals, a company whose board, as I argued in my July 2018 letter to Congress, was lined not with doctors, but with investment bankers and hedge fund managers. These companies, I said, engineered the American epidemic of skyrocketing drug prices. Beyond just prices, their business models focused on disease management and symptoms maintenance, not curing disease. And this led to blockbuster profits at the expense of taxpayers, investors, and patients. When I uncovered fraud at Ligand in 2014, I revealed it publicly, but not before openly shorting the company's stock, which earned millions for my investors. The SEC then charged me, elevating my fight to a global stage and blurring the lines between God, money, and power. And this wasn't my first attempt to warn Congress. On December 21st, 2016, almost 2 years before the SEC charges and before any primary wins for Trump, I sent my first open letter to the U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging. In it, I detailed Ligand's unethical and sometimes criminal behavior. For example, abusing the Orphan Drug Act of 1983, as well as a litany of accounting loopholes. I explicitly stated that Ligand systematized the monopoly pricing practices that gave rise to similar abuses by companies like Martin Shkreli's Retrofit, Valiant, and Mylan. My concern was for patients, U.S. taxpayers, and investors. My initial letter specifically warned that Ligand's abuses have squandered taxpayer dollars and impacted our country's fiscal stability. The SEC, however, ignored all of this strong evidence of fraud presented to them over a multi-year period. This long pattern of documented inaction and collusion on their part is central to understanding the systemic failures at play. Ligand's own taxpayer-subsidized R&D spending, designed to stimulate innovation, was gutted, for example, from $44.6 million in 2007 to $13.4 million in 2015, a decrease of 70%, even though the company had substantially more drugs under orphan drug status.
And the SEC's relationship with Ligand? That network of influence?
Calling it a network of influence is putting it very lightly. It's actually deeply troubling. At the heart of this orchestration was Brad Bondi, a pivotal figure with deep state ties whose influence seems to stretch to the highest levels of government action. He was Ligand's lead outside counsel, a former high-ranking SEC official, and a regular contributor to Bloomberg News. He maintained personal relationships with SEC commissioners and was reportedly set to become an SEC commissioner himself had Trump won in 2020. This is not just a lawyer defending his client. This is a central figure in the very deep state Milton refers to, someone who bridges the divide between corporate power, regulatory authority, and media influence. Ligand even explicitly urged the SEC for years to pursue me. An email from a Ligand executive, cited by the U.S. magistrate, even read, quote, "He needs to be silenced for good," end quote. They also made a presentation to the SEC depicting me in my priestly robes as part of their campaign. Ligand used two of the largest multinational law firms and likely spent millions in shareholder capital to, quote, silence me.
So he's a key example of the revolving door that critics often speak of.
He's not just a key example, he's the foremost example of the revolving door. And his firm, expensing over $1 million in shareholder capital to silence me, was later named in the media for prompting the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission to take a short seller to trial for the first time. Bondi himself tacitly admitting gaining paid access for his client. This reveals the core truth. Powerful interests can and do purchase influence over the very mechanisms of justice.
Then the system Milton describes, government colluding with short sellers, in your case, it reversed. The government colluded with your target.
My target? Well, it owned the government. That is the more accurate and far more dangerous depiction. We uncovered an email. SEC staff attorney Virginia Rosado de Salet's disclosing a non-public investigation of me, a whistleblower, to Ligand's counsel, Brad Bondi. Whistleblower reports are sacrosanct, protected by, quote, enhanced confidentiality protections. And I filed 5 such reports regarding Ligand's fraud. Yet, in practice, the SEC protected the fraudsters while attempting to silence the whistleblower. This was a targeted campaign to kill the messenger, a chilling reality for anyone who dares to speak the truth, a pattern tragically seen with other investigative journalists like Gary Webb, who exposed uncomfortable truths about powerful institutions. Adding to this, Ligand's lobbying efforts extended to Congress. Duncan Hunter, the congressman representing Ligand's California district, sent a letter to the SEC strongly urging them to investigate me, accusing me of, quote, spreading falsehoods, end quote, and causing, quote, substantial harm to shareholders, end quote. Hunter later pleaded guilty to criminal charges, illustrating the compromised nature of the individuals involved in this prosecution.
The short sellers were building a fake report on me and the company prior to us going public. And their entire goal was, okay, the SPAC is going to go crazy. We went public via SPAC. It's a special acquisition company. They knew it was going to go up, and what they wanted to do was then force it down, and that's where they make their money. So what they were doing is they were working with the Department of Justice. They were actually communicating with the Department of Justice prior to releasing the report.
Is that it?
Anything else you want to add?
I woke up at something like 1 a.m. and started watching the Tucker Carlson interview with Trevor Milton. Prior to that, I had had a casual exchange with him, though we never spoke by phone. And as I listened to the interview, I was struck by his lack of sophistication and his identity as a victim. He had identified himself. It had become his sense of person, his victimhood, which spanned 5 years, less than half the time I was prosecuted. I was also struck by his sense of victimhood over being discriminated against for, being in what he seemed to allude to being the billionaire class. At the same time, I don't doubt his suffering, and I don't doubt that he suffered greatly at the hands of the government. And I don't mean to judge him. There's a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I wanted to find something in that interview that I could identify with Trevor, that I would see some parallels or similarities in our experience. But the more I listened, the less I found him credible. First and foremost, I did not see any part of the interview where he could definitively refute any of the allegations in the Hindenburg report. Anyone who asks me about the fraudulent allegations against me by the SEC, I can quickly respond, less than 1 minute, with detail, invalidating the demonstrably false charges. And the more I listened, I became convinced that it's almost certain that Brad Bondi, his lawyer and the brother of the sitting Attorney General Pam Bondi, was the conduit for his presidential pardon, and that was achieved monetarily. I didn't hear anything about the technology of his company, Nikola, which sounded even vaguely scientifically groundbreaking. In fact, in reading the Hindenburg reports, which I would encourage everyone to do, it seems that whatever technology or science they were promulgating was at its best in its infancy. And then the amount of money he spent, $80 million, and his firm, $100 million, $180 million combined. That compares to just $2.5 million I spent over 11 years. And now, the First Circuit ruled that the SEC will have to face reimbursing me for my legal fees. He may have gotten a presidential pardon, but apparently it cost at least $180 million, none of which he's getting back. But Trevor is going to be okay, because from what I understand in the interview, he still got his remaining $700 million. The investors, on the other hand, in Nikola, it seems that many lost everything that they had invested. This is an old story. The story of the founder who creates value for himself, but not for shareholders. And it's all too common amongst the special purpose acquisition companies, the SPACs, so many of which were fraud. I would say the majority of which. So many met their end within just a couple of years of their IPOs. Of course, they're not really IPOs, they're reverse mergers. And Tucker Carlson, impossible to respect him as an investigative journalist. That's not an investigative journalist. An investigative journalist asks pointed questions, and the innocent, they can prevail. They can emerge through those pointed questions, and the viewers can decide for themselves. Instead, what we see in Tucker Carlson is a professional political propagandist whose platform might very well be for sale for people to rehabilitate their reputations, Martin Shkreli, Trevor Milton, so forth. Maybe Trevor Milton's innocent. It's not my place to say, and it's certainly not my place to judge. But if I had to bet, I bet Nate Anderson at Hindenburg was 100% correct on all the allegations. And his misguided anger at what he perceives as his suffering, and from what I could tell, there was no actual real tragedy or loss other than the loss of $180 million in legal fees and maybe a 5-year distraction. Apparently, the guy never spent a day in jail. If that's all it wasn't that bad, actually. And when you see the ignorance of Tucker Carlson, the lack of financial sophistication, in fact, both of them, failing to even describe short sellers in the most basic terms, which were accurate, for example, referring to buying the shares, the fact that Trevor Milton, after 5 years of litigation, couldn't even use the most featherweight terms from the financial world or the legal world correctly, I found mind-boggling. And for Tucker Carlson to suggest that short selling simply became legal in 2007 when it's existed for hundreds of years And I will tell you, short sellers, by and large, do the very best work on Wall Street. Not just because they have unlimited liability, but I truly believe most short sellers are disturbed by fraud. They're disturbed by abuses in accounting. And they're disturbed by the many, many pump and dumps on Wall Street. What Milton and Carlson were describing was a proverbial short and distort. That's what I was accused of. There's only been 4 cases in the history of the SEC where short sellers were accused of manipulating markets by shorting and doing so openly under their own names. I was one of them. The other 3 were obvious and demonstrable frauds. But we can't overlook the same players who are involved. Brad Bondi, Donald Trump. The fact is, the government doesn't take a position. The deep state doesn't take a position on these matters. It's for sale. Everything's for sale. The regulators are for sale to the pharmaceutical industry, to the military-industrial complex, to the highest bidder. And whether it's the whistleblower / short seller who needs to be silenced to protect a share price so insiders can sell, and let me tell you, there's far more pump and dumps, exponentially greater number than short and distorts. And in fact, undoubtedly many people will have called Nikola a pump and dump. After all, look at Trevor Milton's exit, something like $1 billion. And yet, where's the enduring value? Where's the intellectual property? Where's the contracts? He says that the company was destroyed by false allegations from the government. Maybe. But lies cannot really truly destroy. The truth is incredibly powerful. And in time, both the truth and justice emerge. If I were Trevor Milton, I would systemically refute every allegation in that Hindenburg report and show the public where Hindenburg was wrong, where Nate Anderson was wrong, where the short sellers that he represents were wrong. Because the reality is, you can buy the government through Bad Bondi and his connections to his sister to do whatever you want. Silence a whistleblower, to buy a pardon. Watch the press release, the commentary that Trump gave when he made Trevor Milton clean, to use Milton's words, when he got his pardon. That didn't sound very convincing to me. It sounded very transactional. And then what really rubbed me the wrong way was Milton's analog to Christ, describing him as looking in his accuser's eyes, suggesting a sort of vengeance, that they were going to pay a price, as Milton seemed to hope that his accusers would pay a price. But that's not what Christ did. Christ, in his extreme humility, looked down, and he prayed for his accusers. He prayed that his Father in heaven would forgive them because they did not know what they were doing. Milton seems to think he can take justice into his own hands. But justice belongs to God, and it will always belong to God. I can say, as a priest, that Milton is a very profoundly confused person if he sees himself as a Christian. As a securities analyst, hedge fund manager, and short seller, who took on the government like him, but actually won, I can tell you he's unconvincing. For me, at least, he lacked credibility. Maybe he thought appearing on the Tucker Carlson show or producing his own documentary would be exculpatory, that it would clear his name. As far as I'm concerned, it just raises more questions. All right.
You've always maintained that the pharmaceutical blah, blah, blah.
He has a poor track record on fasting. He was once accused of using vulgar language, but he said the accusation was bullshit. He loves the smell of gasoline and burning oil around his motorcycles and never stops drinking Coke Zero. He hasn't learned how to walk away from a fight. He's been to hell and back more than once, bringing a few public companies along for the ride. Other clergy scoff at him. The SEC and Big Pharma try to, quote, silence him for good. But their efforts haven't had the intended effect. That's Father Emmanuel.
Growing up in Tirana, where the call to a dawn echoed from the spiraling minarets, was a powerful experience for her. Albanians were forced to convert to Islam under Ottoman rule. In 1967, under the Marxist-Leninist regime, Albania became the world's first atheist state and destroyed churches to eradicate Christianity, in a land where St. Paul once preached the gospel. Her grandfather fought as a guerrilla fighter, and her father commanded a tank brigade. When communism collapsed, there was an insurrection against the state, leading to anarchy. Albanian women are known for their resilience. It is said they are born from the barrel of a gun. As a teenager, her father was flown out of the country without notice on a military helicopter to save his life. From then on, she started sleeping with an AK-47 next to her bed. That's Presbytera Theodora.